The most beautiful dream of my life suddenly turned into my worst nightmare. My son's wedding, that sacred day I thought would bring us joy, became the beginning of an invisible wall of ice between me and my daughter-in-law. For years, I tried to understand why she hated me. That hatred was like a veil of fog. But one day, the cruel truth behind that veil revealed itself in all its rawness. And in that moment, I tasted the heaviest form of a parent's grief. My name is Margaret. I had only one son, and his name was Daniel. I dedicated my entire life to him. When my husband passed away at a young age, I became both mother and father. Every single wish of Daniel's was an order to me. I worked day and night so he could study at the best schools and live the best life possible. And he did. Daniel became a very successful engineer. During his university years, he met a smart and beautiful young woman from a well-respected family in the city. Her name was Sophia. When I first met Sophia, my heart soared like a bird. How lucky I am, I thought. My son is gaining a wife, and I am gaining a daughter. I promised myself that I would never treat her differently from my own child. Their wedding was like a fairy tale. It was held in one of the city's most luxurious hotels. Throughout the ceremony, I smiled at everyone with that indescribable pride only a mother can feel. But each time I smiled, I felt that something was wrong. On Sophia's face, there was a strange coldness toward me. Sitting at the bridal table, her eyes never once met mine, or even my mother's. She only smiled at those around her, as if basking in the glory of the fancy gowns and the elegant hall. When I tried to speak with her mother, she responded with the same chill. At that moment, I realized I did not belong to this family. I was simply the mother of the groom, meant to stand quietly on the sidelines. And in the middle of that dazzling ballroom, I felt a pain in my heart that words cannot describe. After the wedding, my son and his new bride moved into their home. According to tradition, I went to visit them with a little gift of welcome. With my own hands, I baked my favorite pastries, cheese rolls and pies. Daniel opened the door, his face beaming with joy. But when Sophia saw me, her smile froze. She neither greeted me nor said a word. She only cast a cold glance. "Look, Mother," Daniel said, "see what I brought you?" Sophia went into the kitchen and returned a moment later with a small note in her hand. On it were the words, "Please do not bring used plates or cutlery. We are very particular about hygiene." In that instant, my heart shattered. That note wasn't for the pastries. It was for me, to humiliate me in front of my son this way. I was so wounded I couldn't even speak. All I wanted was to run away. From that day on, Sophia's hatred for me grew like an avalanche. No matter how hard I tried to be kind, she always found a way to belittle me. Whenever I called my son, she would answer, "Daniel is very busy. Don't bother him." Even when my grandchildren were born, she kept them from me. And the fact that my son remained silent through it all cut me even deeper. It broke my heart to see him torn between his mother and his wife. For years, I tried to understand why she hated me so much. Perhaps I had done something wrong, committed some unforgivable mistake, but I found nothing until that day, the day when the merciless truth behind her hatred revealed itself through a letter. And that letter would not only change my life,
but my son's life as well.
The moment I had waited for all those years came in the most unexpected way. A plain white envelope slipped under my door without a name or an address. Curious, I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a thin, folded piece of paper. The handwriting was neither my son Daniel's nor my daughter-in-law Sophia's. A cold shiver spread through my body. "What is this?" I whispered to myself. My heart seemed to know I was about to open the door to an unknown truth. As my eyes moved over the shaky letters, each line I read gave me the answers to questions I had carried for years. The note was written by Sophia's aunt, and its content showed me that my entire life had been built on a lie. The words hit me like a bomb. Sophia's family had been made to believe terrible lies about me. In the letter, it said they had been convinced that I was a poor and uneducated woman, and that despite my son's success, I was nothing but a burden to him. Even lies about my grandchildren's births had been spread. Sophia's family had been led to believe that in my home, everything about me was something to be ashamed of, and they saw themselves as saviors, rescuing Daniel from this miserable situation. Sophia's aunt wrote that all these lies had been told at a business dinner in the presence of Daniel and Sophia's father, and that it was Daniel himself who had spoken them. At that moment, the letter slipped from my trembling hands. Tears rolled down my cheeks, falling onto the very words that had shattered me. I remembered Daniel's face the day he said, "Mother, look what I brought you." He hadn't been bringing me a gift. He had been bringing me a lie. He had created it. For years, I had tried to understand why my daughter-in-law hated me so much. I blamed myself, searched for mistakes I might have made, but in truth, that hatred had not come from her. It had come from my own blood, my own child. After his father's death, when I had been both mother and father to him, my son had begun to see me as an obstacle to the luxurious and glamorous life he dreamed of. In his eyes, his success and career would always look smaller next to a mother as ordinary as me, and so he had lied about me. That letter revealed not only the truth, but also the shame my son carried toward me. It was proof that all my sacrifices, all my dreams for him, all my love had been twisted into something he resented. That night, as a mother, my heart was shattered by the very child I had given everything to. But from that broken heart, a new strength began to grow. This lie, this humiliation could not go on any longer. It was time for Daniel and Sophia to face their conscience. I would turn their lives into a nightmare, because an insult like this, a lie like this, carried a price. The next morning, I called Daniel and told him something he never expected. "Daniel, we need to talk. It's something that could change your marriage and your life forever." The tense expression on my son's face lingered even after we hung up the phone. When we finally met, I noticed the strange tremor in his voice. When they came to my home, Sophia's eyes carried the same coldness and distance as always. But in Daniel's eyes, I saw unease and guilt. I knew what I had to say, but I didn't know how to begin. Years of disappointment, pain, and anger pressed into my throat like a fist. I placed the letter from Sophia's aunt on the table. Daniel's face turned pale the instant he saw the envelope. In that moment, I knew he wanted nothing more than to escape, to end the conversation as quickly as possible. But inside me burned a fire. I would reveal the dirty secret he had hidden for years. That letter was no longer just paper to me. It was my shield. I slowly opened the envelope and drew out the letter. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice trembling so much I could barely hear myself. For years I tried to understand why Sophia hated me. I blamed myself, searched for mistakes I might have made. But it turns out all that hatred came from my own son. Daniel's face turned ghostly white. Sophia stared in confusion, trying to make sense of what was happening. "This letter," I continued, tears streaming down my face, "says the lies you told her family about me, that I was poor and uneducated, that I was an obstacle to your success. Daniel, why?" The silence in the room was deafening. Sophia's mouth fell open in shock. Daniel bowed his head. His guilt was written all over him. Through my tears, I saw just how deep his hunger for status and his shame ran. I had raised him alone after his father died, giving up everything for him. And yet he had sacrificed me for money and prestige. Daniel began to cry, quietly. He lifted his head, his eyes glistening with tears. "Mother," he whispered, "I never wanted it to be this way. Sophia's family meant everything to me. I wanted to prove myself to them. All my life I grew up in a poor neighborhood, fatherless, never belonging in the world of the wealthy. Sophia's family, they gave me a chance. You told me after Dad passed that my only inheritance was myself. But to be accepted by them, I sacrificed everything. I didn't sacrifice you, Mother. I sacrificed the truth." At that moment, my anger gave way to a crushing sorrow. My son was so insecure, so desperate to be accepted, that he had been willing to sacrifice even me. Sophia burst into tears and ran from the room. She too had been a victim of his lies. Daniel looked at me helplessly, but I had nothing left to say. For him, I had sacrificed my life, my career, my dreams, and he had sacrificed me for money. Then I understood. His father's greatest legacy had been honesty and compassion, and Daniel had betrayed even that. The letter was not only proof of a lie, it was a testament to the shame my son carried toward me. That night I realized the truth. The wound he inflicted on me was deeper than any enemy could have struck, because it was not strangers who betrayed me. It was my own child.
When Sophia slammed the door and stormed out,
The silence that filled the room weighed heavier than all the lies Daniel had confessed. My daughter-in-law had been a victim of a lie, but the deepest wound had been carved into my heart. There he sat before me, head bowed, the son I had dedicated my entire life to. In that moment, I wanted to scream at him, to unleash years of bottled-up anger, but all I could whisper was, "Why? Why did you tell that lie? Why were you ashamed of your mother?" My sacrifices, all the years I had given for him, had become nothing but a burden in his eyes. And that was the cruelest truth of all. Margaret, her eyes glistening with tears, looked at her son and began to speak. Her voice carried the pain of all those years. "Daniel, I gave my life for you. I worked for you, lived for you. I taught you always to hold your head high, never to bow to anyone. But you threw away the only inheritance I left you, your honor, just to please those people. You trampled on the pride of a boy who grew up without a father and of the mother who raised him alone. Your father told you the most important thing in this world was honesty, but you chose lies. For what? Status? A name? Your greatest wealth was the bond with your mother. That bond was worth more than all the money and luxury in the world, and you destroyed it with your own hands." Daniel slowly lifted his head, his eyes brimming with tears. "Mother," he whispered, his voice breaking into sobs, "I was a coward. I wanted to belong to their world. I was terrified of their contempt. So I humiliated you, my most precious treasure, in their eyes. You're right. I became a slave to money. I'm sorry, Mother." My rage gave way to a deeper sorrow. I could see how lonely, how desperate my son really was, but that did not erase what he had done. The boy I had sacrificed my life for had sacrificed my honor. Margaret rose slowly to her feet and stood before him. Her voice was colder now. "Daniel, there is no way I can forgive what you've done. Sophia may have been a victim of lies, but you were the one who created those lies. As a mother, I cannot live with them. You no longer have a place in this home, in this family. Go and find your own path. I tried to protect your father's memory. You have defiled both his and mine." From that day on, my life slowly found order again. A letter from Daniel's lawyer arrived soon after, confirming he would no longer pursue anything further. That day, I hadn't only lost a son, I had regained my life. I dug out my old recipes, baking the pastries I loved. I tended to the flowers in my garden, each bloom giving me hope and strength. The months that followed brought me a peace I hadn't felt in years. I thought it was over. I thought I could carry on with life as it was before. Peace had become my greatest wealth, but sometimes life delivers unexpected storms. Just when you think everything is behind you, a new battle arrives. One morning, the postman handed me a thick, official envelope. When I saw the logo of a large law firm printed on the front, my heart sank. My pulse raced. Another lawyer's letter? Was the nightmare starting again? My hands trembled as I tore it open, and the first lines shattered all the peace I had built.
This letter wasn't from Daniel. It was from a prestigious law firm representing Sophia's family. The subject? The fountain. They claimed the land where it stood was their property, and they demanded, through legal means, its immediate demolition. The words cut into me with brutal force. This wasn't about land, it was revenge. Sophia's family felt humiliated by Daniel's lies being exposed. To them, the fountain we had built in that poor neighborhood was a monument to their shame.
In front of the whole town, it stood as a symbol of their moral collapse. But for me, that fountain wasn't just water. It was my father's honor carved into stone. And now they wanted to tear it down. This was no mere property dispute. This was money and power declaring war on honor and love. They weren't just targeting a fountain. They were targeting the dignity of my entire family. I thought I had finally found peace, but that letter showed me the real battle had only just begun. This time, it wasn't just my son standing against me. It was the cruelty of wealth and power itself. At once, I picked up the phone and called our lawyer, Mr. Harris. My voice trembled, but my resolve was unshaken. "Mr. Harris," I said, "a new letter has arrived. It seems the fight isn't over." In that moment, I knew this new war would be far harsher, but the fountain, my father's memory, and the hope I saw in the people's eyes gave me strength. For them, for my father's honor, I would fight again, and this time, losing was not an option.
When I stepped into Mr. Harris's office, the files sitting on his desk made all our previous struggles seem almost trivial. The name printed on the folder belonged to one of the largest and most powerful law firms in the city. Mr. Harris removed his glasses and placed them carefully on the table, his face heavy with worry. "Mrs. Margaret," he said gravely, "this time the situation is very different. The opposing side isn't Daniel's family, it's Sophia's. They're an immensely powerful and wealthy family. They claim that the land where the fountain stands was once purchased by your father, but that the deed was never properly registered. This is not just an inheritance dispute. This is wealth and power waging war against moral values." At that moment, a fresh wound opened in my heart. Once again, my father's honor was being sacrificed to someone else's greed. This wasn't simply a lawsuit, it was a plan for revenge. By tearing down that little fountain, Sophia's family hoped to cleanse themselves of the humiliation caused both by Daniel's lies and their own wounded pride. For me, the fountain was a symbol of my father's honor. For them, it was a monument to shame. Suddenly, I felt exhausted. On one side stood my father's legacy. On the other, the ruthless power of Sophia's family. I knew the price of this fight. Crushing legal fees, endless court sessions, and above all, the loss of peace. Was it really worth it? Was that fountain truly so important? The thought shook me to my core. For a brief moment, I considered surrender. But then I remembered the laughter of a child drinking from the fountain, and in that moment, I knew I could never give up. After speaking with Mr. Harris, a memory of my father returned to me. I was a child, playing beside that same patch of land.
My father had stood next to me and said, "One day, I will donate this land to the poorest in our town, but I cannot secure the deed right away. What matters is my intention." That memory lit a small flame of hope inside me. My father's intention had always been for that land to belong to the poor. He wanted to gift it to them, and now his goodwill was being twisted into a weapon in the hands of lawyers. But I knew the truth. This was not about deeds or property rights. This was about fulfilling my father's last wish. I realized then that my father's greatest legacy wasn't a legal document. It was the story, the spirit behind that piece of land. I turned to Mr. Harris with renewed determination. "We won't back down," I said. "We will prove my father's intention in court. This case is not merely about land, it is about a family's honor. They may fight with money and power, but we will fight with honesty and love. They don't understand how pure my father's intentions were, but we do. They don't understand that the greatest inheritance he left us was his integrity, but we do. This will be a battle fought to the very end." As I walked out of Mr. Harris's office, the warmth of the sun touched my face. No matter how grueling this war would become, I knew I would win, because my father's honor stood beside me. The fountain was not just a source of water, it was a living symbol of the love and compassion he had passed down to us. They could try to destroy that symbol, but I knew the hopes of the whole community were rooted in it, and no lawyer, no courtroom could ever erase that hope. This wasn't just about defending an inheritance. It was my mission to protect my father's memory.
When I returned from Mr. Harris's office, I knew a new battle had begun. This time, my opponent wasn't just an ambitious son. It was the full, merciless force of wealth and power. My days were consumed by endless phone calls with lawyers, documents piled high, and pages upon pages of cold legal jargon. There was so much paper, it felt as if my father's entire life had been trapped between those dry sheets. Sophia's family wanted to erase their humiliation. Our building of that modest fountain had exposed both Daniel's lies and their own loss of face. To them, that fountain, standing in the poorest part of town, was a monument to shame. To the entire community, it was proof of their moral and spiritual downfall. But to me, the fountain was not just a source of water, it was a tribute to my father's honor. And now they wanted to tear that tribute down. This was no simple property dispute. It was wealth waging war on dignity and love. It was an attack on the very honor of my family. In the middle of this legal chaos, I heard my father's voice echo in my memory. Years ago, when we walked across the land where the fountain now stood, what had he told me? His words gained new weight as I remembered them. "Margaret, my daughter, I'll donate this land to the poor of the neighborhood, but the deed has an old and complicated history. What matters is intention." In that instant,
A light sparked in my mind. Yes, the deed had been missing, but my father's intent was crystal clear. That land belonged to the poor. That was my ray of hope. His goodwill was now being twisted into a weapon in the hands of lawyers. But I knew the truth. This was not about land titles. It was about fulfilling a father's final wish. I realized then that the greatest inheritance my father had left me wasn't the deed itself. It was the story behind it. Following Mr. Harris's advice, I began searching for the deed. In one of my father's old notebooks, I discovered a note. It said the deed was kept in an old chest inside our town's abandoned municipal building, long forgotten and crumbling. The place was dark, filled with dust and cobwebs. Slowly, step by step, I searched according to my father's directions. Old papers lay scattered everywhere. For a moment, I considered giving up, but then I saw in my mind the faces of the children drinking from the fountain. That was when I understood this wasn't just a search for a deed. It was a search for the symbol of the love and honesty my father had left us. When I finally pried open that dusty old chest, I found a yellowed piece of paper lying inside. My heart nearly stopped. It was the deed my father had spoken of, and in that moment, I knew my inheritance was never truly the deed. It was the story of his goodness. That paper was more than a legal document. It was proof of my father's compassion, honesty, and love. All my fatigue melted away. I clutched the paper and whispered, "Father, I've honored your trust." At that moment, I knew I would win this battle because I stood not only with the truth, but with my father's honor. This was not merely a legal fight over property. It was honesty against greed. Sophia's family wanted to tarnish my father's memory with the power of wealth, but I would fight them with the greatest inheritance he left me, his integrity. That yellowed paper from an old chest was now my greatest weapon. I felt my father protecting me even after death. He had given me his final lesson. True inheritance is made of values no amount of money can buy. And I would defend that inheritance with every breath. No matter how brutal this war would become, I knew one thing with certainty. I would win.
When I walked out of the old building, the yellowed paper in my hand was more than just a document. It was proof of the greatest inheritance my father had ever left me. I went straight to Mr. Harris's office. The moment I opened the door, the worry and fatigue on his face turned into sheer astonishment. I placed the dusty, fragile paper on his desk. "This," I said, "is the deed to the fountain. I found it following a note my father had left me." Mr. Harris stared in disbelief. He picked it up carefully, examining every line. Slowly, a victorious smile spread across his face. In that moment, I understood my father's integrity was stronger than any amount of money or power. While they had tried to stain his honor, my father, even after death, was still protecting us. That paper was not merely a deed, it was a symbol of his eternal love.
Mr. Harris reminded me of something I had almost forgotten, that my father had once left a note about keeping the deed safe. At that moment, I recalled my father telling me, "This deed is precious. I'll preserve it for the future of this town." And once again, it struck me. The greatest inheritance he had left me wasn't the deed itself, but the story it carried. Even in death, my father was still guiding me. This wasn't simply about a piece of property. It was a symbol of the love and honesty he had passed down. I turned to Mr. Harris. "Will this be enough to win the case?" I asked. His face lit up. "This is more than enough. This isn't just proof of your father's ownership. It reveals just how malicious their case truly is. While they tried to claim your father was of unsound mind, he was carefully safeguarding this deed. In truth, he was teaching them a lesson, and now it's their turn to learn." A surge of strength rose inside me. It wasn't my own strength, it was the legacy of my father flowing through me. The greatest inheritance he had left me was his integrity, and I would hold on to it with all my being. No matter how exhausting or brutal this fight became, I knew I would win. Because on my side was my father's honor. The fountain wasn't just a source of water, it was a living symbol of the love and compassion he had left us. They wanted to destroy that symbol, but I knew that beneath it lay the hopes of an entire community. No lawyer, no courtroom could ever erase that hope. This wasn't merely a property dispute, it was a mission to protect my father's memory. This fight wasn't just about a deed, it was about a father's intention and his integrity standing against the cruelty of money and power. Sophia's family might have thought they could tarnish his legacy with wealth, but I would fight with the greatest weapon he left me, his honesty. That yellowed paper from an old chest was my strongest shield. Even in death, my father was protecting me, teaching me one final lesson. True inheritance lies in values that money can never buy. And I vowed that I would protect that inheritance until the very end.
After finding the deed, all my fear had vanished. As we walked toward the second hearing, it felt as though we were marching into battle, but this time our weapon was the truth itself. When we entered the courtroom, Daniel and Sophia's family were already seated. Their faces carried the same arrogance and air of superiority, as if they had already won. But they had no idea of the power of the yellow deed I carried. Their lawyer, cold and ruthless as always, tried once again to prove that my father had not been of sound mind. His words stabbed at my heart like knives, but I knew they meant nothing, because on my side stood my father's honesty and the undeniable truth. When our turn came, Mr. Harris took a deep breath and presented the deed to the judge. A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. The judge lifted the fragile paper, examining every line.
Slowly, his stern expression shifted into surprise. In that moment, I realized the deed was more than just a document. It was my father's greatest lesson. While they had tried to tarnish his honor, my father, even in death, was still protecting us. That aged paper was not only a deed, but a symbol of his eternal love. And then I saw it. The arrogant looks on Sophia's family's faces melt into shock and fear. This was no longer just a case for them. It had become a humiliation. After reviewing the deed, the judge turned to their lawyer. "You know this document holds full legal validity. Your client's claims are meaningless in the face of this evidence." The lawyer's face turned pale. He had nothing left to say. Then the judge looked directly at Daniel. "Mr. Daniel," he said, "your father's will was meant as a test of conscience. You have failed that test. What do you have to say for yourself?" Every eye in the room turned to my son. Slowly, Daniel lifted his head. He didn't look at his lawyer. He didn't look at Sophia's family. He looked only at us. And in his eyes, there was no anger, no greed, only deep regret. In that moment, I understood it wasn't just Daniel who had strayed from my father's final wish. I had distanced myself from him too. But now, the fountain and this deed were bringing us back together. Daniel rose from his seat and walked toward us. Sophia's family stared in disbelief. When he stood before me, he fell to his knees. Tears filled his eyes. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I was a coward. I lied. I sacrificed you. But you protected the greatest inheritance my father left us. The fountain, the deed. You did what I could not. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." At that moment, all the anger and bitterness inside me dissolved. With tears streaming down my face, I embraced my son. And suddenly, that courtroom was no longer a place of judgment. It became a symbol of rebirth. My father's will had not only brought us together again, it had made us a family once more. That day, I realized how empty all the lawsuits, ambitions, and lies truly were. Real inheritance was not money. It was the power of love and honesty. We hadn't just won the case that day. We had defended my father's honor and proven to the world the strength of the values he left us: love, compassion, and truth. Daniel finally understood the true inheritance my father had left, the priceless treasure of family and love. And that was a victory far greater than any court ruling.
As we stepped out of the cold doors of the courthouse, the warmth of the sun melted away the ice that had built up inside us. At that moment, the outcome of the trial or Daniel's lies no longer mattered. The only thing that truly mattered was that we were a family again. My mother and I embraced Daniel, and it felt as though the frozen wall that had stood between us for years had crumbled in an instant. He was crying, and I too shed all the tears I had been holding back for so long. In that moment, the courtroom was no longer a place of judgment, but a symbol of rebirth.
My father's will had not only brought us together again, it had made us a family once more. And right then I understood how meaningless all the lawsuits, all the greed, and all the lies truly were. The real inheritance was not money, it was the strength of love and honesty. Our lawyer, Mr. Harris, joined us. His eyes were wet with tears, but his face shone with a joy beyond words. "This was my friend's final wish," he said, "to see his family united. You've made it happen, and to me, that is worth more than any case." In that moment, I realized how deep his friendship with my father had been. Even after his passing, my father was still protecting us. He had shown us that the greatest inheritance was the priceless gift of family and love. That day, Daniel finally spoke. "Mom," he whispered, "I was a coward. I wanted to belong to their world. I was afraid of their judgment, their scorn, and so I sacrificed you, the most precious person in my life, to gain their approval. You were right. I became a slave to money. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." At that moment, all the anger and resentment inside me disappeared. With tears streaming down my face, I embraced my son. That courtroom had ceased to be a place of conflict. It had become a symbol of renewal. My father's will had not only reunited us, it had restored us as a family. And once again, I understood true inheritance is not wealth, but the strength of love and integrity a father leaves behind for his children. And because I have that inheritance, I feel like the richest person